Thank you very much for inviting me. And here really I am talking in the role of professor, not of politician. And as it was already mentioned, in university where we are working in our department, we have been dealing with research on integration matters since 1997. It means 20 years. Though we have followed the process which have been quite complicated, and the present situation is really described and analyzed not by myself, but my young colleague, Professor Triin Vihalem. We recently published a big book on Estonian society, and there is a very big part, the part about the situation of how Russian minority, or Russian-speaking minority, because they're not all Russians, they're Russian speakers. And there's special chapter also about media, but the most important, interesting chapter is about the typology, because this typology really is showing where we are now with integration matters. And maybe we can start a bit with the concept of integration, because when we started in 1907, then really we took over the John Berry's concept of integration, and the situation was very different from nowadays, because then, since Soviet time really, Estonian community, Estonian language community, and Estonian Russian-speaking community, they really had very different, say, spaces of everyday life. They almost didn't communicate with each other, and the first task was just to recognize that there are also people inside society who are not sharing the language and not sharing the values, are not sharing the traditions, but they are there, they are part of society. And our first campaign really was the big posters all over Tallinn. Look, there are nice people around. So it was really addressing not so much Russian minorities, but more addressing Estonian majority, just to call attention to this new situation. And now we can say that we are quite far from this point. We really can talk about partially accomplished integration, I would say. And when we now look at integration, as social scientists look really, that there are really like two layers, the systemic integration and social integration. Then we are much more advanced in systemic integration. Systemic integration means that it is, say, the relations inside institutional structures, including citizenship. It is participation in civic life, participation in economic life, and so on. And here I will say that those 25 years have changed, not all, but have changed a lot. And for example, we now have, when in the 0 point in 1991, we established citizenship law, and then it was a situation where majority of Russian-speaking population didn't have citizenship. Now we have now we have really half, a bit even more than half of Russian-speaking population with Estonian citizenship. And it is important to understand where was the starting point, because when we are coming to international audience and say that we have half, then say, oh, it's not possible, it's so little. But when we start from 0, then we say that really it is quite an advancement. Because among the other half, also you have to take into account half of them, almost or even a bit more, are citizens of Russia, Russian Federation. And that's a real problem. It's a problem which is so difficult that we even haven't have a good strategy how to deal with that. And then we have one part who are so-called grey passport owners, who are not citizens of any of these sides, not Estonian nor Russian, so they have all rights of third country nationals in the EU. They have free travel, they have in Estonia all rights besides some political rights, meaning national elections on parliament, membership of parliament, membership of governmental positions. But if you, for example, look at all other areas of life, then there is no difference. In social protection, no difference. And if you look at the local elections, the local life, then they're participating in local elections and very actively participating in local political life also. So though it means that we have like formally 3 groups of Russian speakers. We're looking from systemic integration. But when we look at the social integration, which means forming like one community, we still have 2 communities in one society, 2 language communities which have quite big distinction. The first distinction is language. And really, this language distinction is very much reproduced because we have 2 language education system. And that means that mostly children are studying in native language, and even if there is a half or 60% to 40%, that basically all primary school is in native language. That means that already when they are adolescents, they are already really like grown as members of Russian language community. And then there is the Estonian language community, and now we have the major really challenge, what we are now discussing. It is how to have, for example, all preschool education in a way that all Russian children also will be free in Estonia, because when they will be free in Estonia as kids, then they have free choice how to go on, because if they don't have language, then it's quite difficult to go on in equal way. And then that's not problem of, say, integration, meaning lack of willingness. It's a lot of structural problems because it's lack of teachers. And it's a very specific problem how to have so-called bilingual kindergarten teachers and so on. So these are practical problems. What is changed in society as a main change is that maybe 10 years ago, it couldn't be discussed. Even 5 years ago, it couldn't be discussed in a very, say, pragmatic and cool and say, normal way. Now it's just a normal, say, practical problem. Everybody recognizes from Russian side, Estonian side, it will be a good solution, but how to achieve that? How to have teachers, how to have facilities, how to have all this thing. Though that's one thing. Then the other thing is the same 2 community situation is reproduced through media. And now we come to media. Because we have quite extensive Russian language media. And this Russian language media really is reproducing the same division. And even worse, because majority of this Russian language media is not Estonian Russian language media. It is Russian language media which is freely available in Estonia, which is produced in Russian Federation. And say roughly 85% of Russian language population are really every day or almost every day really living in this media space. And you understand well that it's not only problems there of language, it's problem of all political attitudes. It's very much problem of identity, because identity very much is answer to a question, who am I, but also where I am living, in which space. And if people cannot really make clear, is their capital Tallinn or Moscow? Then it's quite difficult, because when they are 6 hours per day listening discourse, our capital, and looking at the Red Square in Moscow, then it's very difficult to understand. And it's a really very ambiguous situation, because at the same time, if you look at these Russian language Moscow channels in Estonia or in Latvia, then they are very heavily commercialized. So there are a lot of commercials which are really local. Meaning that there is this kind of discourse, political news here in our capital Moscow. And then is next advertising. In our capital Tallinn, there is concert or some markets and so on. And if you are in this situation, then you are really, really confused. We have our local Estonian Russian language media also. And this is, in this sense, much weaker than this Russian one, because Russian TV is extremely rich looking at money. They're just rich. And for that they are producing technically very, say, good program, technically. And then also in the same time, they are very aggressive politically. So that they are in very much different way showing the news and world compared to the normal way, neutral, objective newscasts, say in BBC or in Estonian television. Estonian local Russian language media press is not very popular, never have been, even in Soviet time. But at the same time, what is our really best practice? I suppose it's our Radio 4. It is Russian language, full Russian language national radio channel, very popular among the Russian population. Almost half of Russian population are regular listeners to this quite a good public Russian language broadcasting. And why I say that it's a big achievement, because if you compare to Latvia, for example, then where there is the same problem, but in Latvia, their public broadcasting is not so successful in attracting Russian audiences. And then we now have a new thing. We have fought a long, long time, together with Irene and others, to have Russian language Estonian TV channel. I remember, I suppose, 10 years at least after this what we had the big crisis with this Russian soldier monument, then there was a very strong demand also among Estonians to introduce Russian language TV channel, to show in Estonian TV really the life of Russians in Estonia and all that. But it was all time said, oh, we don't have money, then we don't have journalists, then we don't have, I don't know, willingness, but now we have it. Now we have worked almost 2 years, yeah? And it is gaining success. It was in the beginning, it was really very, very, say, marginal. But it is gaining recognition. And then it is, in this sense, important that in first moment, the Russian political propaganda from Russia said that, oh, now Estonia will do this propaganda channel in Russian. And what we have achieved really, it is not propaganda channel. It is normal, democratic, Western, Russian language TV channel. And then for that, it is gaining trust. And I suppose it's a very big achievement. And then what is interesting, our Russian population, according to our data, is very actively using international channels. That's certainly due to Russian language, because you know Discovery is in Russian, History Channel is in Russian, Euronews is in Russian. And when somewhere in the West I'm talking about this, how big audience these channels have, for example, Euronews, then all my Western colleagues say, oh, not possible. Euronews is something very marginal. Nobody's looking Euronews. I say, no, Estonian Russians are looking Euronews. And here we now come to integration. Because when my, as I said, young colleague, Triin Vihalem, have now published in this recent book her typology of Russian population according to the level of the way of integration. Then really what came up? There is about 20%, so 1/5 of Russian population which always have been coming up as, for example, mostly citizens of Estonia with wealth, knowledge of language and so on. But now when you look at their attitudes, and when you look at their media usage, then they are not fans of Estonian media. They are very much using international media. They are free in Estonian language. They a bit more are watching Estonian language channels, not so much this Russian one. They don't feel themselves in this sense minority because they are already like accommodated. But they are very Western-minded and they are very cosmopolitan. So we can say that they are not integrated in Estonia, they are integrated in Europe. That means that their, say, identity and then the positive attitudes are more toward the other countries, not Estonia, the better countries, more well-off countries, and so on. And this is a group, it is most, say, integrated in formal terms, but also most interested in leaving Estonia for some other country in Europe, in the West. Though, it is that? It is positive because, yeah, they are not hostile, they are not alienated, they are not unhappy, they are successful and happy. But when we made the strategic integration programs, then we had idea that this part of Estonian, say, Russian population will become, say, Estonians or Estonian Russians, but they are not. They are becoming Europeans who are sometimes even more critical concerning Estonia than some others who are not so well, say, integrated without this knowledge of language and so on. The most positive concerning Estonia is a group of Estonian population who, according to formal criteria, is not so well integrated because of language. With poorer knowledge of Estonian language, older a bit, but very much interested in Estonian life, looking and reading at the Estonian Russian language channel. For them, it's very important to have Russian language channels. Very active citizens, because among them also there are majority of citizens actively participating in elections and so on. And they are feeling themselves Estonian Russians. They are not feeling themselves somewhere European. They are not interested in going out and so on. They're older people, not very old, but older, and a bit less educated. This is first group. And then we have among Russian population 2 other groups. So the first 2, what I mentioned is 45% altogether. And 55 are those who, one part of them is very passive and really living only in Russian TV, in Moscow TV. Their life is there. Their life is on their living room, watching this TV 6 hours per day or even 7 and 8. They're living there. They are celebrating all fests with Putin and taking part in Putin's interviews, and they are voting for Putin if they are Russian citizens. And then there is other group who is more active, very interesting group because they are very active in local civil life, in so-called municipal life. They are very active, they are participating, but they are not very much feeling that they are part of Estonia, because in Narva, for example, they feel that they are Narva. The Narva is special. Narva is not Russia, Narva is not Estonia, it is Narva. And almost the same is in Lasnamäe and Tallinn. There is a Russian part of city where also they are not Tallinn, they are not Estonia, they are Lasnamäe. They are topically they are there. But they, in this sense, they are not negative. They are mostly positive, but they are not part of, say, don't feel themselves part of this Estonian community. So are they integrated? In some sense, not. Are they not integrated? Also not. They are somewhere there in quite this in-between situation. Among them are also people with a grey passport. Though what we can say, that media are not really playing any kind of leading role. Media is for different groups playing different role. And even if you look who are watching more, then the most active are the most integrated or most active this group, this 19%, because they are omnivores. They are going from channel to channel. They are in social media, they're everywhere, but they're very critical toward the media. So it's very simplified to understand what sometimes our politicians do, that if you're watching Kremlin television, then you are Putin-minded. No, this group is very critical. They are interested what is going on in Russia, but they are not pro-Putinist. So it's not the same. This fact of following some media is not yet fact of, say, adhering to this mental world. It's complicated. And though this is this kind of cosmopolitan transnational media usage and this cosmopolitan identity which have been created, this is a very interesting sign of this new situation. And now when we try then to describe what media really can do, then here is a long list. I will not read that. You can see it. The main thing is that if in situation of the democratic and free media, what we really have in Estonia, I have to say, be it in Estonian language and Russian language, then we speak not about the propaganda, not about then some changing minds, but what we do with the media, we are creating this picture of reality, mirroring reality, creating some kind of identities, and so on. And for that, it's very important that what media is mostly doing, it is creating this feeling what is taken for granted, what is normal in this society. And when we now look at Estonian media and ask what is normal in Estonian media, then here, as a joke, I will say, the Russian minority has the same problems as women. in Estonian media. Because when we speak about generally about this kind of inequalities or this, then there is an obvious, say, bias in Estonian media towards a more masculine representation. If you look at the political debates, then very often you see only the dark suits and male voices. And the same is with the problem with the Russian minority. Even we have now very, very active politicians also. We have very different situation from what we had in past. We have new Russian background, but Estonian-speaking political class emerging. And tomorrow you will have really a very interesting opportunity. You will have real, in this is political theater, political performance, because you will have three of our, say, the newly emerged leaders, one lady who is fully Russian, because she was my student, I know, I have taught her. She's fully Russian, fully, ethnically. But he is free and Estonian. He had worked in Estonia's most popular newspaper after graduating. And now she joined the patriotic, in Western mind, nationalist party, Estonian. So we have Russian-speaking, fully Russian, Estonian nationalist. Certainly she's not. She's democratic. And this party also is not some kind of Le Pen. It's quite a normal Christian democratic party. But it was her choice to join this party. Then you have the newly celebrated leader of Tallinn, who had 24,000 votes. He is like representing Russian minority. Ethnically, he has no gene, no Russian gene. He is partially Estonian from father and Korean from mother. So that's our second Russian leader you'll see tomorrow. And the third is our minister and chairman of my party, the youngest political leader, Yevgeny Ossinovsky, who is really from, say, partially Russian background, because he's also partially from Estonian background, but as he had fully Estonian education, fully, and also fully UK education after that. He graduated twice in Warwick and in London School of Economics. So he is very well representing this new cosmopolitan, new elite, but his Estonian, say, habitus and language is not differentiating him from any Estonian politician. And he's very good in disputes and representing fully, in this sense, Estonian politicians. And then we have the fourth, who will tomorrow be presenting then this party in Estonia who had emerged as counterparty to any kind of integration and then any kind of refugees and so on. So we will have real interesting performance to see what we have in reality. And what I really can say as an expert also, that this is a situation we couldn't imagine 10 years ago. Three young Russian background leaders, fully accepted in Estonian society. It wasn't imaginable 10 years ago.